Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my hot takes for this upcoming offseason. A lot of different things will unfold, and definitely some things on here that I didn't even have that definitely will unfold over the next little bit. So we'll be on the lookout for that. But let's get into the top 10 returning players in college football. Very tough list to put together. So many talented guys all around the country, but you'll find that a lot of these guys come from the same couple of teams. There's a lot of double ups in this list because there's a lot of really talented players that are concentrated around a couple of teams. So we'll get into this really quickly, and I wanted to start over there in Clemson, South Carolina, because TJ Parker is a freak in every sense of the word. I think this is one of the best pass rushers in the entire country. Over 10 sacks a year ago. He heads into his junior year as one of the premier guys in the entire sport. I very much believe that he could be a top 10 pick when we get over the 2025 NFL draft or 2026 NFL draft, excuse me. Very talented guy, and he's someone that could very well deliver Clemson a national title. I think the offense is going to be more than fine. I think Clay Klubnik going into his third year in that Garrett Riley offense is going to be really incredible to watch, but the Tom Allen defense needs to step up in a big way. TJ Parker is going to be at the center of it. He's going to be the guy that steals all the headlines. He's going to be the guy that maybe wins a game for them outright, like a JTT Penn State type situation. He's going to make a number of plays and be the guy that we talk about in glowing terms leading up to that NFL draft. Anthony Hill Jr., the linebacker over at Texas, this is the best linebacker in the country as far as I'm concerned, and he is a guy that remarkably athletic. Someone that plays linebacker at that size should not be able to move the way he does, and he took a huge step between his freshman and sophomore year. He now goes into his third year, and I fully expect him to be another guy that goes top 10, top 12 in the NFL draft this upcoming year because he's a leading tackler on Texas this past year. I fully expect him to be that again, and then he's off to the NFL draft. He's an incredibly talented player, can drop back into coverage whenever you need him to, but he is very special. Rushing the passer, very special in that spy type of position, and if you're a football team, you badly need one of those guys. You badly need that rangy linebacker that can make all the plays in the world. This is the guy that can play 53 yards wide and make sure that he makes all the plays. Peter Woods, we'll go back to Clemson here for a second. Peter Woods, the defensive tackle over at Clemson, just an absolute freak. It's insane what this kid can do, and frankly, a lot of people have been talking around the college football world. I think he sits at 315 right now. If he got down to 300, this could be the very best player in the country. This could be a guy that totally transcends what defensive tackles are at the college football level and maybe even at the NFL level. That's how special I think this kid is. I think he can be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. I think he could very well be a top 5 pick. If he drops a couple of pounds this upcoming year, he gets a little bit faster, a little bit more twitchy, he's going to be terrifying. He's going to be one of the most disruptive players in the run game that you've seen the entire season. Had 3 sacks a year ago. I think he unlocks that just a little bit more in 2025, and I think he's a very special player. One of those guys that might not get talked about quite as much as he probably should, but just insane. A ridiculous athlete, and really, if he gets down to 300 pounds, he could become one of the best, maybe the best player in the entire country. Then you got Jeremiah Love, the running back over there at Notre Dame, had tons of injuries throughout the CFP, and it kind of tampered down what could have been a very special 4-game run of his, where he has that incredible run against Indiana to start things off, actually the picture right there, and a couple of different things that happened throughout the next couple of games kind of tempered that down a little bit. Had a couple of injuries, had apparently felt sick for a number of different, for the game against Georgia. Just a tough time for Jeremiah Love throughout the CFP, but the reality is he's someone that CJ Carr badly needs in his first year under the helm, because if you have a guy that you can just dump the ball off to, he's going to run 70 yards and then hurdle over a guy into the end zone, you got to feel pretty good about what you got. He's an absolute difference maker and one of those guys that I can't imagine I can't imagine the world where he doesn't play for the Heisman. I think he will be very much in that conversation, though. I think he will absolutely be a guy that, at least deep into the season, they're kicking around an idea of him getting to New York. Incredibly talented player, and I think it's just the tip of the iceberg for what we're going to see in 2025. Ryan Williams here at number 6, the incredible 17-year-old still. I think about February 9th, if I'm not mistaken, is his birthday to turn 18, and he will move on to his sophomore season over there in Tuscaloosa. He's as good as it gets. The acceleration is ridiculous. The stop and go is absolutely world class. The body control is, I don't even know how he does some of the things he does, and the hands are on the next level. The kid is ridiculous in every sense of the word. He made the play of the year as far as I'm concerned because he made 3 different moves in that play against Georgia that I didn't think were physically possible. I didn't know humans could do that. he is able to do that. And maybe he's not human, to be totally honest. But at the end of the day, a lot of teams are going to be pushing for him to transfer in the spring portal. I don't expect that to happen. There's been some murmurs out there. I tend to believe a lot of that comes from Tennessee and Georgia fans and people around the SEC that want to see him transfer. But at the end of the day, I think he will stay put regardless. He's going to take over games in 2025, and he kind of has to. He's got to be far and away the wide receiver one for this team, and I think he very well can be. He's a remarkably talented player, and I think once he gets a little bit more of that physicality and part of his game, it might just be downright unstoppable, if I'm being totally honest. Then you got Dylan Stewart, the edge rusher over at South Carolina. He's built in a lab. He's an absolute freak of nature when it comes to physical ability. He can do so many different things. The bend is just absolutely ridiculous. The speed and physicality is a mix that you don't always get, and especially you don't get from freshmen at edge rushing, but that's exactly what we got from this kid. And he's going to have to be the guy in 2025. You lose Kyle Kennard on the other side of the ball. You lose TJ Sanders on the interior of that defensive line. He's going to have to take over. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be double-teamed essentially every single snap in some form or another, whether that's a chip or just adding another offensive lineman, adding a tight end, adding a running back, whatever that looks like. He is getting all the attention, and he fully understands that. Everyone understands that. He's still going to have to make plays. If South Carolina is going to be the team that they very badly want to be in 2025, this is the guy, and really the defense in general, that needs to step up in a huge way and make all the plays in the world. It's not going to be an easy task by any means, but they're absolutely a team that can make a little bit of a run. Dylan Stewart's going to have to be the guy that probably delivers it there as much as Lenore Sellers really is. Then you got Denai Dennis Sutton, a remarkable edge rusher for Penn State that really kind of burst onto the scene during the CFP. Now, if you're a Penn State fan and people around college football, you knew the name. That was not necessarily a name that you were surprised by, but definitely was one that really burst onto the scene in the CFP and became a household name very, very quickly. I think he will be a top 10 pick in the 2026 draft, but he said it very, very plainly. He wants to be the best defender in college football. He said it a couple of years ago. He's found his way up to that level right now. I don't think he's quite there yet, but I think he's absolutely someone that's in that conversation, and he's going to end up being one of the best players in the CFP. He ended up being one of the best players in the CFP, and he could very well be a guy that delivers Penn State to another to a national title, because he has everything you could possibly want in an edge rusher. Definitely going to need a little bit of help from some other people, especially with Abdul Carter out the door, but the reality is this guy is more than capable of taking on some double teams and winning them. I think he's going to be more than fine and maybe end up being the best defender in college football at the end of the year. Another edge rusher, Colin Simmons. One of the most gifted freshmen I've ever seen. We talked about Jeremiah Smith ad nauseum throughout this year, and he very much deserved it. But the reality is, if there's anyone that's going to question Jeremiah Smith for that number one overall spot in 2027, it's going to be this guy. This guy is an absolute freak. He might have had a pressure on just about every single snap this year. It felt like he was always in the quarterback's face. He was always making the right move. His speed is just ridiculous. His first step off the ball is almost unfair to offensive tackles around the country. He had 9 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, and an INT as a freshman. I think he's going to do more than that in 2025. I think he could very well get up to 12.5 sacks and be one of the most disruptive players in the country. I think he's a guy that every single time you talk about a Texas game, you have to talk about how the opponent's going to try to deal with this guy in particular. Not just the defense of Texas, not just the pass rush of Texas, but how are they going to deal with number 11? He's an absolute freak of nature and a guy that you're not going to deal with just one-on-one. I can absolutely promise you that. He's going to be another one that you're going to have to chip, that you're going to have to double team, that you're going to have to do different things with, because if you don't, he's exploding that game, plain and simple. He is making that game just his the entirety of the way, and he is taking over, and you're never going to hear the end of it. He is an absolute monster and a guy that I very well could believe that could take that number one spot from Jeremiah Smith at some point throughout his career. Caleb Downs, the safety over at Ohio State, is my number 2 player, one of the more gifted players I've ever seen on the football field. And it's not just the, outright physical ability, it's just his instincts. I've never seen a kid that walked into a college football team, especially a team like Alabama, and led them in tackles in year 1. He's an absolute freak and a guy that makes just always the right play. There's never a play where he feels like he's out of position. There was the play in the national championship where he got called for holding initially, And I think everyone watching was like, I don't think that happened, because it was Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs isn't going to make a mistake like that. It's Caleb Downs. So he's that type of player. He is a player that feels perfect when you watch him. It feels like he has about 3 of them all around the place, and he's going to make all types of plays in 2025. He was 3rd in tackles for the Buckeyes in 2024. Was only behind Sonny Styles and Cody Simon, the remarkable linebacker duo. Also had 6 pass breakups, 2 INTs to go with that. The kid's special in every sense of the word. He would go top 5 tomorrow if you were an NFL team, and he gets one more year to show things off. As of right now, I think he's running away with Jim Thorpe Award. Now, there will be other guys that will pop their name into that mix, of course, but at the end of the day, that is the best DB in the country, and it's not all that close. I hate being that guy, but it's not all that close right here. And then Jeremiah Smith, the very best player in the country as far as I'm concerned, and he's only going into his sophomore year, which means we get 2 more years of this kid. And if you're a Michigan fan, that sounds terrifying. If you're a Penn State fan, that sounds terrifying. If you're just a college football fan, you're very excited about that, because the kid's a freak in every sense of the word. It makes no sense what he can do on a football field. It's one of those things that you thought you saw everything. When we had Marvin Harrison Jr. at Ohio State, you're thinking, okay, that's ridiculous. No one can guard this guy. He can catch everything around him. He can do everything you want to do. And then Jeremiah Smith takes a jet sweep to the house. And you're thinking, okay, what are we doing? What can this kid do? What's the one thing that he cannot do? And frankly, if Ohio State needs a little bit of an offense at any point, just direct snap it to him. Just get the ball into his hands right away and just let him make a play, because he's not a wide receiver. He is a football player. He's going to make every single play you possibly want him to make. He badly wants to be a 3-time champion, too, before he leaves. He had a little bit of a slip-up, said he wants to make it 4 in a row, and then went right back and said, let's make it 3 in a row, because he's leaving after his junior year. But at the end of the day, if you're talking about generational players, I hate talking about generational players because they very rarely happen, hence the word generational. This is one of those. I really have not found a better word to use for him. He is an absolute freak. He's a guy that literally looks like he was built in a lab to be an NFL wide receiver. He is going to be at some point, but for the time being, he's a college football player, and to me, he is the best player in college football. It's a remarkable group returning in 2025. It's a very interesting group. A lot of guys that are going to be all over the place, a lot of guys that might fall a little bit short of the expectations I just put on them, but at the end of the day, I think there's so many talented guys, and there's so many guys that, especially at that edge rushing position, that are going to be downright special. But one question here: who are the most underrated running backs, receivers, and tight ends in the nation? That's a very interesting question. I think there's a number of different guys out there you could really talk about. I think for running backs, I think you have a number of different guys. I'm trying to think of a really good one. Nate Frazier is a name over at Georgia that I think is really, really fantastic. Jaden Ball might be a little bit not underrated at this point, but the guy down there at Florida makes incredible plays all over the place. In terms of receivers, I think you have a number of different guys. Maybe a DeAndre Moore over at Texas, a very, very talented receiver. Maybe even a Jaden Greathouse, maybe a little bit on the radar now than he was before, but definitely a guy that I think is going to burst onto the scene, maybe be one of the best wide receivers in the country next year. And then you talk about DBs. That's a little bit tougher. I'll be totally honest with you. There are a number of really, really talented guys, no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, I can't put my finger on. AJ Harris. That's the one I'll pick. AJ Harris, the corner over there at Penn State. Remarkable player, and absolutely a guy that I very much enjoy going into the 2025 season. For tight ends, I'll throw a random one out there. I'll throw out Lincoln Kerr, the guy over at Kansas State, a freshman that's coming in. I think he's going to do some special things for that team and maybe even be the leading receiver for that team in 2025. So just a couple of guys there. Was kind of scrambling a little bit, so might not be my overall choices, but definitely some guys you're going to want to keep your eye out on as we get throughout this offseason. But let's take our final break here. When we come back, we'll get into the weekend wrap-up, all the coaching carousel news, some replay changes may be coming. ESPN picks up the ACC deal through 2036, and I'll give my final words before I log off for the final time at GSMC right after this, so stick with us.